This lesson, ladies and gentlemen, uh, we want to talk about shifts in supply and demand curves. But for you to understand, you have to recall the following. You recall one, the uh, determinants of demand or supply, determinants of demand and supply. Let's just say that in the moment. So that requires you to revisit the demand or the supply function. The demand and supply function summarizes the determinants of demand. The demand function summarizes the determinants of demand, and the supply function summarizes the determinants of supply. So we are talking about factors that affect demand and supply. Okay, so we know that demand can change if demand of a product can change if price, or in other words, only price changes. That's price of the commodity itself. We know that if income of consumers changes, demand will also change. For example, if price increases, then the quantity demand will reduce of that particular commodity. If income of consumers increase, they will demand more of normal goods, things like that. Changes in tastes or preferences, we are talking about government policy, we are talking about expectations, etc., etc. Okay, so if the government imposes a tax on a product, demand for that product reduces. If people expect the prices to increase in the near future, they will buy now, so increasing the current demand. We can do the same for a supply function. So supply is also determined by own price. So if price increases, then suppliers will supply more to make more profit. We're talking about again technology. So if technology improves, then supply is most likely to increase. We can also talk about maybe input prices. Okay, input prices. So, or price of inputs rather. Or in other words, the cost of production. If cost of production increases, then we expect supply to reduce. We can also talk of government policy. Imposition of a tax will reduce the supply. We can also talk about expectations as well. So if people expect prices to increase in the future, they will sell now, meaning increasing supply. So etc., etc. as well. There are so many factors. Okay, so that's what I wanted you to remind you. And then we also need to recall about the demand and the supply curves. Okay, we also need to remember this as well. We haven't yet started talking about the shifts. We just want you to remember these. So these are, you may recall that these represent relationship between relationship between price and on price rather, these and quantity demanded or quantity supply. Okay, so it means the demand curve shows the relationship between only price of a product and quantity demand, while the supply curve shows the relationship between on price and quantity supply. So you and I know that supposing that this is a demand curve, I mean we want to represent here, suppose here we have quantity demand, the origin, and the price. We represent it this way. This is on price. So we know that if if we're talking about that the price of a commodity is here, for example P1, okay, then for example maybe demand was here, quantity demand 1, okay, we know that if price increased, let's say to P2, then we know that quantity demand ought to reduce, maybe somewhere to QD2 again. So then we can maybe join these points here. If price reduces, this was an increase. If price reduces, let's say to P3, we know that demand will increase. It will be more than here, D3. So we have another point here. We can call this point A, point B. We can call this point C. But you see, we can join these 3 points. We can join these 3 points. It's the one that we're calling the demand curve. So it is showing the relationship between price and quantity demanded. Okay, so as we can see, we can conclude that price and quantity demanded are negatively related. So the slope of this curve is going to be negative. While for supply curve is the opposite. We said that if price was here and quantity demand is here, increase in the price will also increase quantity demand. I mean quantity supply, sorry. Okay. If it increases, then we know that quantity supply will also increase. If price reduces, then the suppliers are making less profits and they will reduce their supply. So as we say, there is a positive relationship between these. So I'm going to call these points A, B, C. Okay, so these are the demand curves. Okay, it's just a reminder because remember our focus will be on shifts. Now, for you to understand shifts, I want you to remember one more thing, and this is about movements along demand and supply curves. Movements along demand and supply curves. So if you have noted in the demand and supply curves, we have represented the relationship between demand and on price on these curves. Okay, so as I was saying, when the price was changing here, okay, when the price was changing, we're moving from point A to point B. We can call this an upward movement. An upward movement which represents a decrease in quantity demand as a result of increase in price. And this was a downward movement along the demand curve. Okay. Similarly here, when price increased, quantity demanded increases, and we had an upward movement in supply curve. So an upward movement in supply curve is increase in supply due to change in price, and then a downward movement is a decrease in supply due to a decrease in on price. So as you can see, these are movements along the demand curve, which are as a result of on price, the changes in on price. So you can as well say that the movements, these are changes in quantity demand or quantity supply due to changes in on price. Okay, that's what we have just demonstrated here. This is just what we have demonstrated here. So you can have an upward movement or a downward movement, and you can interpret them as I showed you here. Now, this is what I wanted you to recall. Now, let's go now to the main meat. What are shifts now? Shifts. What are shifts? Let's go to the main meat. So shifts are changes in quantity supply, quantity demand, or quantity supply due to changes in factors other than on price. Other than on price. Okay, so I showed you the determinants of demand and supply here, and we have only shown the relationship between these and this. So the rest of the factors will cause a shift. These will cause a shift. These are causing a movement. These will cause a shift. So we'll look at a few examples to elaborate what we're trying to say. So I will draw another set of curves here. Okay. Another set of curves here. Now let's call this the demand curve. The demand curve, which will be like this, and let's call this a supply curve. Let's call this a supply curve like this. Okay, so now let's assume that the price is here. This is the price. So demand here and price is here, and this price is fixed. Okay, it's not changing. The price is not changing. So what will happen to this market if income of consumers increase? We know quickly that quantity demand will increase. But we know that the price will be the same. It is income of consumers that has changed. So now we have a new point here. What if income of consumers reduce? Okay. So let's say maybe to QD3. But the price is the same. Price is the same. We know that if price is the same, then maybe we are talking about this point. So it means in either case we need a new demand surge, while here we also need a new demand curve, something like that. So we can say this is D1, we can say this is 2, we can say this is demand. So we can call this a rightward shift, and we can call this a leftward shift. So a rightward shift is going to be an increase in demand due to another factor except on price, because on price is causing a movement. Okay, so you can see that the fact when the factor changes, when these factors change, when these factors change in a way that they want to, in the way that they increase demand, then there is a rightward shift in demand. If they change in a way that they are reducing demand, then the demand curve will shift to the left. The same with these factors on the supply curve. Okay, so we can quickly look at that. So if this is let's say supply curve, and this is the price. So supposing that technology levels have improved, suppose that technology levels have improved, we know that supply will increase. But the prices of the commodity are the same. So it means we need a supply curve which is parallel to the old one. Supposing that cost of production have increased, we know that the supply will reduce. So we have a new point here, and we have another curve which is parallel to the original curve. So similarly here, the leftward shift is reduction in supply, while rightward shifting is so maybe in a nutshell, we can summarize what are some of the causes of the rightward shift in demand curve. We can just list some of them. So we have one, increase in income of consumers. We can talk about increase in expected price. If people expect price to increase in future, they will demand now. And we can also talk of government policy. For example, if the government reduces a tax on a product, demand will increase. Okay, we're talking about government policy. What about leftward shifts in demand curve? Then it's the opposite of this. So it will be reduction in income of consumers. It's going to be decline in expected price, and then imposition of a tax by the government. This will reduce demand. Okay. What about the causes of rightward shift in supply curve? Okay, so these will be things like improvement in technology. It will be reduction in cost of production. Issues like government policy, maybe reduction in tax. This will also increase supply. In terms of leftward shifts, so it's the opposite of this. So it's going to be maybe reduction or deterioration of technology. We can talk about increasing cost of production. Okay, the government, policies, of course, will also be here. And then we can also talk about maybe increase in tax. Okay, so all these will cause shifts in demand curve, so or in supply curve, depending on what you analyze. Now, I want us to conclude by the application. Let's apply application of these things. Application to equilibrium condition. Let's apply this to the equilibrium condition. We know that in an equilibrium condition, we have quantity here, origin and the price. We are not specifying. This is both supply and demand. The x-axis is measuring both. Okay, so this is the equilibrium. This is the equilibrium. Something like this. This is equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price. We know that we may have different kinds of shifts. We know what can cause this. We know what can cause this. Okay. So maybe for us to understand, let's say we're also talking about changes in equilibrium conditions. Okay. So you see that the equilibrium was here, but if there is a rightward shift in demand curve, we know that the equilibrium condition will increase. Okay, so we know that the equilibrium condition will also increase. Okay, so something like this. So at E2 we have equilibrium quantity 2 as well. Let's call this E1 maybe, E0, something like that. Okay, so this is the new equilibrium. While if we have this leftward shift, then we know that this will be the new equilibrium now, because we trace the equilibrium where there is an intersection with the supply curve. So this will be the new equilibrium. New equilibrium, something like this. So this is 1 and this is something like 3. We can then conclude that okay, similarly, if we have this time around, let's change the supply curve. So this is okay. Here we're talking about the changes in demand. Okay, so that's the equilibrium. Okay, that's the equilibrium. So let's call this a supply 1. But now let's assume that we know what can cause the rightward shifts in supply curve. We know what can cause the leftward shifts in supply curve. But we know that on both scenarios, the equilibrium is changing. So like this is let's call this E2 and let's call this E3, and then these are their respective points. This is going to be equilibrium quantity 2, and let's call this equilibrium quantity 3, and these are their respective prices. Okay. So now, if we want to conclude this way, what are the causes? What are the causes of changes in equilibrium condition? So the first cause are the changes in quantity demand. If demand changes sudden, then we know that the equilibrium condition will increase. So here the changes can be broken down into 2 rightward shifts and we know what can cause rightward shifts and again leftward shifts. And we know that when there is a rightward shift in demand curve, equilibrium price increases and equilibrium quantity also increases. So it's worth noting. So we can put the results here of each cause. So this implies that there will be increase in equilibrium price and increase in equilibrium quantity. While this is going to be the opposite, there's going to be decrease in equilibrium price and decrease in equilibrium quantity. Okay, that's what will happen. More quantity is going to be exchanged if demand all of a sudden increases, and we know what can cause the increase or the rightward shifts in demand curve because we have already stated here. So many factors can lead to that scenario. So everything is here in this video. And then what are the causes? The second cause, there will be the changes in quantity supply. And again, we have rightward shifts in supply and leftward shifts in supply curve. So we can also take note from the graph what has happened. And there was a rightward shift. This is a rightward shift, and this is a leftward shift. So what happened? What happened with that? We know that when there was increase in supply, prices reduced, and then quantity exchanged increased, something like that. Okay? So with this, we know that equilibrium price will reduce, and consequent quantity exchanged will also increase. Here it's something like a paradox. The price increased and the quantity exchange increased as well, because the first thing to happen was increase in demand. So more has to be exchanged and price has to increase because of that fact. But here, because we're talking about supply, then prices will reduce because supply has increased because of factors that we have already stated. While a leftward shift will result into increase in, it's just the opposite, increase in price and then reduction in quantity exchanged, as you can see on the graph. The leftward shift resulted into increase in price, but quantity exchanged reduced, something like this. Okay, so this is what it means, so that you can clearly see what is happening here. The leftward shift resulted in increase and increase as well, but the leftward shift resulted in increase and a decrease and a decrease. While here the leftward shifts, it resulted in a decrease but an increase in price. So that's what it is. So I want to ask you, if you want more of these videos, or you want specific topic to be delivered, then don't hesitate to contact me through this number 135917, or contact me at siasiamc@gmail.com. Okay, siasia@gmail.com for more of these videos, or you can visit my channel, my YouTube channel as usual, Solve It and the tutorials, or you can visit the same on Facebook, or you can as well visit my website www.mscmw.org. or solve it solve it solve it dot solve it dot msc dot org. So that's how you can do this. That's how you can contact me for more videos, or if you want to donate to our activities or to know more about ourselves. Thank you very much.